Well, good afternoon, everyone. Are we awake? Are we ready? Good afternoon, everyone. All right, that's a little better. I'm Kim Hogan. I'm the CEO here on campus. I want to welcome you to our annual academic convivium. Now, when I even say the word academic convivium, it brings a swell of pride to me because here we are, top of a hill at a community college here in Connecticut, and I'm telling you now that our academics are second to none. You're going to see some fantastic, excellent work today in the academic research fields. I can tell you that year after year, I continue to be amazed at what our students put together here on our campus, and I'm sure that this year is not going to be any different, right? It's just fantastic. I bring greetings from not only me, but we have our academic dean, Donna Montanibus, here. We have two others that are a little busy today in other things, Dean Hansen and Dean Tessman. All of us here in the administration are just so happy when we have events like these, because it really is a testament to the excellence that we have on our campus. For families that are in the room, how many families do we have here today? Everyone, I want you to look around because, and uncles, family, anyway, parents, uncles, friends, support staff people. I want to see your hands again because I got, excellent. So it's really, students, look around and see those folks. Along with us here at your campus, your faculty, your tutors, and your parents and those that are here to support you today. This is what it's about. You have the supports. You have people here that as you continue to progress in your academic career, we're still going to be here. We're still going to be pushing you so that you can achieve whatever your dreams are. I'm not going to take up much more time because I know I'm going to get kicked off here because you have a very strict process for getting through all of the presentations today. But I just want to say congratulations to all of you on your research. I look forward to seeing it. If I'm not here, I will be viewing it. We do have it recorded. I'll be in and out of the presentations today. And again, I just want to welcome you and thank you so much for all that you do. Congratulations.
Thank you, CEO Hogan. Welcome, everyone, to our 11th annual academic convivium at CT State Middlesex. I'm Dr. Andy Levy. I'm so pleased to have you joining us today. Today, you're going to hear student presentations on research projects on topics ranging from the opioid crisis to sexual health among young women in South Asia. And I think you're going to be really impressed by what you see. I certainly am, and I think you will be. And you also have the opportunity to learn a lot. I also have had the opportunity to learn a lot in mentoring a lot of these projects. We were supposed to have more special guests, but we have at least one special guest here today, Marcia Tanone, who is the honors coordinator at Tunxus. Thank you so much for joining us. Perhaps your students will present next year. And I think we have a couple other honors program coordinators and students coming, I believe, but hopefully they're on their way. Before we jump into presentations, I want to say a few thank yous. First and foremost to CEO Hogan for her unwavering support of the honors program and this event. How do you say Corey's married name? What is it? Ruggieri. Okay, Corey Ruggieri, for her help with organization and food. Our maintenance staff, Todd Levesque, for filming for us. And Emily Canto, who's always by my side, who I am very grateful for. Just a brief note on what to expect today. We're going to have our series of oral presentations. You have that information in your program. And then we will conclude the day with a couple of poster presentations, so you'll have the opportunity to view these students' posters and talk to them about their work. So without further ado, I want to introduce our first set of presenters, who are Leslie Dominguez, Lucia Petrucciello, and Samantha Millian. Come on up.
Hello, everybody. My name is Lucia Petrucciello, and these are my colleagues.
I'm Samantha Millian.
And I'm Leslie Dominguez.
And for our topic of research, we decided to look at what extent modern college students still endorse traditional gender roles. So, what are traditional gender roles? They are societal expectations that are based around one gender. Some examples of these include thinking that men should be strong and stoic, while women should be soft and nurturing, or thinking that women should stay at home and take care of the children, while men are the breadwinners and the providers of the family. These ways of thinking pursues even into careers. People think that men should be the doctors, while women should be the nurses.
So based on these consequences that my group mate had discussed, based off of these ideologies that my group mate had discussed, there are certain consequences that come along with these traditional gender norms, and our group focused on looking at how sexism leads to hostile work environments. So for the first subtopic, we have unequal wages. As you can see in the first bullet, it says that a woman earns 48 cents for every dollar made by a man, and this was found out by a survey in 2024. In another article released in late 2023, it showed a small percentile reduction in the gender pay gap from 14.3% to 13.1% for all workers. That includes part-time and full-time employees. More specifically, to focus on just full-time employees, there was a pay gap reduction of 7% from 7.5%. Our second consequence that we had researched on was sexual harassment. Research shows that women are far more likely to be victims of sexual harassment and or sexual assault in comparison to men. Based off of a survey that we had researched called the Me Too movement, although the name contains the word movement, it is actually a national survey done by the Newcomb Institute at Tulane University, revealed alarmingly high rates of sexual harassment and assault. In the survey, they qualified sexual assault as any unwelcome behavior ranging from catcalling to stalking and unwanted touching in a sexual way. It also assessed sexual assault, which they defined as a forced or coerced act of sexual intercourse. As seen in the data, the percentage of women who experience some sort of sexual assault or harassment is nearly twice the percentage of men. Our last consequence that we had researched on was pregnancy discrimination in the workforce. Pregnancy discrimination is described as when an employer takes an adverse action against an employee or a potential job applicant because they are pregnant, recently gave birth, or have a pregnancy-related medical condition. This entails refusing to hire a woman because she is expecting or recently gave birth, refusing a promotion because of said reasons, and or firing or forcing an employee from their position because she is expecting or recently gave birth. So 20% of mothers, based on the research that we have done, have encountered such feelings in the workplace. And more specifically, 23% of mothers have contemplated leaving their jobs due to pregnancy discrimination, which refers to a lack of flexible work arrangements from their employer, meaning that they aren't allowing the employee to work a hybrid work schedule or remotely from home, inadequate work adjustments, and insufficient leave policies.
There's not only consequences in a work environment, but there's also consequences in a large consequence in education. A major influence that causes these come from social influences, abilities disparities in high school, and certain interventions that strive students towards certain careers. There was a survey done in September of 2023 that stating that Gen Z girls and young women say that they are not interested in STEM careers, 57% reasoning because they wouldn't be good at it. There are only 35% of females enrolled in STEM fields generally, and there are 28% females researchers in a worldwide population. Boys typically shy away from certain subjects like humanities and arts, typically because for boys they're offered more extracurriculars like science and robotics clubs. As for teachers in public schools, there are more females as teachers. 73% are females and 23% are males. These influences cause limitations on academic success and aspirations based off of these consequences. We have identified our study objective to be to determine the extent to which CT students endorse traditional gender roles. The methods that we used was a survey anonymously that was sent to Middlesex students. The email offered no compensation in order for it to be filled out, and the survey assessed with agreement with traditional gender norms, gender roles within one's own household, and the demographic information as follows.
So the results from our survey was that we had 105 total participants. Out of those participants, the average age range was 27. Around 80% said that they had completed a high school education. The majority identified as racially white and cisgender female. Almost 95% stated that they grew up in a heterosexual household, and over 55% identified as heterosexual themselves. So this graph shows the percentage of participants who strongly agreed and agreed with traditional gender roles. We had over 15% agreed that men should be the breadwinners of the family. Less than 5% agreed that men should be tough and aggressive, but on the flip side, over 20% agreed that women should be passive and nurturing. Over 5% agreed that men shouldn't participate in self-care, and over 25% agreed that men should not dress femininely, while less than 5% agreed that women should not dress masculinely. And a little bit of over 5% agreed that only certain jobs should be done by men. This next graph shows the flip side of those participants who strongly disagreed and disagreed with the traditional gender norms. So here we have a little bit under 10% agreed that women should not work outside of the home, and less than 5% agreed that women should disagreed that women should earn the same wages as jobs as men in the same job fields.
So for these graphs, we actually compared the cisgender male and the cisgender female's response. So for majority of the questions that we had asked within the survey, there were not very much significant differences, so differences that we should note of. However, there were some cases where men agreed more to a certain statement rather than females did. So for example, the graphs that show men should be tough, aggressive, and unemotional, as well as women should be passive, nurturing, and helpful, the cisgender male significantly agreed more than the cisgender female. These graphs are a continuation of the previous ones. 2 out of 4 of the statements here there were statistical differences, those being that men should not participate in self-care and men should not dress femininely. And as well as in the previous slide, the significant difference was that the cisgender male agreed more than the cisgender female.
So in conclusion, we found that a minority of participants did not agree with the traditional gender norms. Men were more likely to agree that men should be tough and women should be passive, but we did find that the answers between men and women were fairly similar. So a big limitation for our survey was that 70% of our participants were female. Another limitation was that this was an online-only survey, so only those who had the technology and the internet could access this survey. Another limitation to consider is the social desirability bias, which means that people may have swayed their opinions worried about what others may have think, although in our situation this is slightly decreased because this was an online-only survey and people are allowed to take this in the privacy of their own homes.
The implications that we withdrew from this research were that traditional gender norms can be upheld by any gender, and with the outcomes of negative social and psychological. That specific jobs associate with specific genders, meaning like doctors for males and nurses for females. This comes from many reasons caused by social, psychological, or cultural consequences, and the gender norms consequences being gender inequality, unequal wages, limited opportunities, and many more other issues. Based off of our research, we found that a large percentage of college students do not still endorse traditional gender roles.
And with that being said, these are our references that we use to carry out our research. And that is the end of our presentation. We thank you very much for your avid attention.
Okay, so our next presenters are Gatlin Granis, Hisham Ralph, Liam Shepard, and Manasseh Ojende, who's going to be talking about stigma around utilization of psychological therapy. Come on up.
All right, I'm Liam Shepard.
I'm Gatlin Granis. Manasseh Ojende.
I'm Sean Roof.
And we did a study on the effects of stigma on the utilization of therapy. And what does that mean exactly? Well, to start things off, it's important to address how common mental illness is amongst college students. Shockingly, about 50% of community college and four-year students meet the criteria for some sort of mental diagnosis. It's even more common in community college students, shockingly, and unfortunately for us. Another statistic, about 12% of college students suffer from anxiety. And by the age of 25, 75% of people have already had some sort of a diagnosis. This is very unfortunate because there are some serious consequences to mental illness. It's been shown you'll have depression, you'll be very anxious. It decreases your social interaction, and in college students, it can lead to degree incompletion or poor grades. The positive on this is that therapy is very effective. It has been shown time and time again to improve mood, improve anxiety, improve depression. They have specific therapies for self-esteem and for drug counseling, and a lot of these are available on campus, actually. Unfortunately, those with a mental illness may not attend. According to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Survey Administration, fewer than half the people who need therapy are actually utilizing it. So what is stigma and why is this important? Well, basically a stigma is a preconceived notion somebody would have about something. In terms of therapy, this would lead you to just all out not go because you don't believe it works or you just think it's hogwash.
So what's the objective of our research? Setting out with this research, we wanted to examine CT state students, specifically Middlesex, and if they held stigma towards psychological therapy and how that would affect their utilization of therapy. Our study's hypothesis, we thought that cisgender males would hold more of a stigma against the utilization of therapy compared to everybody else, and that stigma of utilizing therapy would influence the utilization of therapy for themselves and also for recommending it to others. For our research, we sent out a campus-wide survey to CT state students to assess, we sent out an anonymous email to figure out how students on campus perceive therapy and their perceptions of it. No incentive was offered for the participation of our survey other than just helping out fellow students for research. So our survey contained questions first assessing who they are, so questions of age, gender identity, sexual orientation, and then getting into questions of their perceptions towards therapy and questions directed towards if they have any stigma towards therapy, such as questions if they hold any stigma towards therapy, like if they don't trust their therapist, like confidentiality, also if they feel they would be judged by friends or family, or even in themselves if they went to therapy, and then their willingness to utilize therapy and recommend it to others as well. And then we concluded our survey with a general mood assessment of how they've been feeling over the past 2 months. The results of our survey, we had really good results with 109 participants for our survey. The majority of our participants were white and female, with a good spread of gender minority. We also had a considerable amount of people at 15.5% saying that they didn't engage in activities that would improve mental well-being, such as exercise or hobbies. And then we also had a lot of individuals saying that they were very stressed. All things considered, we did send out the survey during midterms last semester, so not too surprising that people were very stressed.
So, statistics, data, what did we find? Well, first of all, we found that 84% of our participants have seen a therapist, and that 38% of participants are currently seeing a therapist. This is a great result. People have seen therapists, and people are currently seeing therapists. All in all, this makes us very happy. Next, the helpfulness of therapy. Around 70% of participants thought that seeing a therapist would be helpful, which supports a previous slide that therapy is effective, and people think it to be so. So, the likelihood of therapy utilization. 60% of our sample thought that they would be likely to use therapy if the need arose, and 86% would be likely to recommend a therapist to someone else if they needed it in their lives. Now, this was particularly interesting because it shows that more people are likely to recommend therapy than actually use it themselves. So just an interesting finding. So these two graphs show two stigmas that we identified in our research. First, the judge stigma, where people thought they'd be judged. 25% of participants thought that the therapist would judge them, and 19% thought their friends or family would judge them. And the second graph is the crazy stigma, where 18% thought that others would think they're crazy for using therapy, and 16% thought that they themselves would be crazy for using therapy. And like the other two graphs previous, this is another stigma, the weakness stigma, with 21% of people thinking that they themselves would be weak for using therapy, while 13% thought that others would see them as weak. This graph is particularly interesting because it sort of shows that people are self-conscious about the use of therapy, that they themselves will think they're weak rather than others thinking they're weak. Now, contrary to our hypothesis, we found that there were no gender differences in the perception or utilization of therapy. This graph shows the average response to survey questions between both cis males and everyone else. And the bars are very close to each other, which means that they answered the same and that there really are no gender differences according to our research.
Okay, so now we're going to go into the relationships between the perceptions of therapy and the willingness to utilize therapy. Ahead on the screen right now, you're going to see a bunch of essential letters as well as locations about where we're putting our data and our information, but we're going to give them some meaning today. So first and foremost, I want you to understand what a linear relationship is. When we talk about a linearity, we're talking about the association between two variables in proportion and relation toward each other. As one goes up, the other goes down, or as one goes down, the other goes up. The next I want to highlight is the variable of R. R means the correlation coefficient. It is determining the strength of our data. Essentially, if you have a positive 1 value, you can see a positive linear connection. As one variable goes up, the other goes up. If you have a -1, that's showing that you have a negative correlation. As one variable goes up, the other one goes down, or also known as inverse. However, if you have 0, means you have zero. You would have no linear relation. You then have a p-value, which is going to then go into in observation of the extremes of your data in comparison to a statistical test, which is also then proving your null hypothesis is true, leading me to the fourth term being what a null hypothesis is, which essentially dictate that whatever we have done today, that there is no actual correlation between the sectors of information that we currently have. As you'll see here, that there is a positive correlation between the perception of therapy as being helpful, thus connecting with the willingness to seek therapy. You can see that because of the positive R value, and then also connected with the p-value being less than 0.01%. If your p-value is less than 0.05, that shows its statistical significance. That what we have did not happen by chance. It's not coincidental, but empirical. However, throughout our study, we were able to see that there was stigma that did towards therapy that was associated with a willingness to utilize therapy. You can see this because there's a negative R value showing an inverse correlation, showing that there are factors that are going to deter people from seeking therapy itself. But still, your p-value was less than 5%, showing its statistical significance in relation to our study. Now we're going to go into the discussion. So, again, against our hypothesis, it was proven that cis male participants, compared to everyone else, have no actual difference in their willingness to utilize therapy, showing that essentially all bodies universally would go to therapy if the need arose from it. Additionally, too, we saw from our entire sample that there was no sort of relation that friends and family would judge them if they actually went to therapy. So, leading back to those points about our R value and our P value, a substantial number of individuals do hold a stigma towards therapy. There is an inverse relationship towards seeing how there are factors that make people unsure or untrustworthy of the source they want to go for help, thus not allowing them, thus basically turning them from going to help in general. Those can be having distrust in a therapist or confidentiality, seeing it as an untrustworthy source. Seeing people have the idea that therapy could be helpful, but then still avoiding its utilization of it. Or people seeing them as weak and crazy, thus deterring you again from seeing it, or you yourself looking inversely to show that you might be crazy for looking for a source that could help you. these perceptions of stigma are associated with lower likelihood of then seeking therapy.
In our research, we do believe we had some limitations. For one, maybe not a representative sample. This could include individuals who didn't have access to a computer or internet access, therefore not having availability to answer the survey since it was an emailed survey, or having to prioritize other things over the survey. Also, we did have a disproportionately large amount of females within our sample size, which again isn't a surprise as the college here has a larger number of females than males, but that was definitely a limitation. Also, a potential limitation was that participants might have started the survey, opened it up, started answering questions, and felt maybe uncomfortable by the questions and clicked off. This might have ironically highlighted a stigma potentially, but that was one limitation that we thought of as well.
So, what's the point of all this? What can we do moving forward? Well, for one, it would be interesting to do this survey again, maybe with a more representative group. Because from our data, it didn't show there was a stigma. But again, this could be because we're predominantly female, so the data might have been skewed. But what's more importantly is identifying that there are stigmas that exist towards therapy. People don't think it works and they don't trust the system. Unfortunately, that is very unfortunate. And I think we have to understand the value of education. If you see someone who's in need, tell them to go to therapy, but also tell them why they should go to therapy and how they can trust their therapy. Instead of just recommending it, give them a reason why it works and tell them how it's safe. And that is all.
So, CT State has recently been kind of developing a policy for AI use among students and really staff and faculty. And these gentlemen have surveyed the student body here to ask about their opinions about AI and their experiences about AI use. So we have Sebastian Hervo, Zach Lee, and Marco Salmon.
Hello, everyone. As was already said, but I'll introduce myself again. My name is Sebastian Elivo.
My name is Zach Lay.
And my name is Marco Salmon.
And our study was conducted to find out what are Middlesex students' opinions about AI. Because my first day here, I found out that no AI was allowed in any of my classes, and that was somewhat surprising. And so we all thought it'd be interesting to find out what other students thought. So to start out, what is AI? AI is the artificial intelligence exhibited by machines or computer systems to perform tasks such as writing essays, solving math problems, solving puzzles and interesting questions, and much more. AI is used by students throughout in school for various functions. AI is used for explaining problems and concepts, creating review sheets and practice tests, brainstorming and research, correcting grammatical mistakes such as punctuation and capitalization, and summarizing text.
So this is the controversy with AI. It has both its benefits and its downsides. It has its capability to help and progress the American education system, but it can compromise the integrity of a student's work. Here are some of the benefits of the usage of AI. It simplifies the lives of students by helping them check their answers and making sure that they're correct, and it betters the lives of teachers by making it easier for them to grade assignments. It also adapts to all the learning needs of a specific student, and students and teachers can help use AI to improve their work. Now here are some of the downsides of using AI. AI allows students to cheat. It encourages students to slack off more, to not do the work necessary for their assignments, and to not learn any concepts. It discourages student interactions with teachers because when they use AI, they do not ask for help from teachers, which we all do all the time. And it hinders the development of critical thinking and problem-solving skills. The objectives of this study were to discover what CT State Middlesex students think about AI and their own usage of AI. Here are some of our methods. We did a study conducted using an anonymous online survey, and all Middlesex students were eligible to complete the survey. The entire student body at Middlesex was invited through email, and we aimed to have at least 100 people complete our survey. And the subjects were not offered a monetary incentive. And the demographic questions showed which groups of students are oriented towards which opinions regarding AI, but the central focus of the survey was to understand what students' perceptions regarding the usage of AI is.
So, onto the results, we had a total of 99 participants with an average age of 28 years old, with predominantly white in race, a little under 1/3 with Hispanic or Latino, and mostly cisgender female. This graph shows what students think should be allowed for AI. Most of them, around 3/4, said that AI should be allowed with restrictions, with only around 20% saying that it shouldn't be allowed at all. This shows how many students have gotten their professors' policies on AI. Although it may look like a lot of them said all, that's still under 40% of all students that had all their teachers tell them their policies, with around 20% having either none or very few policies on AI told to them. This graph shows what students answered sometimes or often to the various questions. This first bar on the left shows if they have ever been allowed to use AI on their college work. That stands around 48%. The next bar over shows if they have ever used AI in their college work, which is also 48%. And there seems to be a correlation between that, where if they are allowed to use it, they tend to use it. The next one over reduces significantly to 9%. Have you ever used college where AI in college work where it was not permitted? This is good because we don't really want AI use when you're not allowed to. So, next one over, at around 60% is when professors restrict AI. That's the amount of professors who don't want it in any of their work. And still, around 40% of students are confused on different ways that they could use AI if they are allowed to. So, these are some of the different ways that students were using AI. At 19%, they used it to come up with ideas for assignments. And at 12%, it was to find answers in assignments. And only 3% used it to write actual assignments.
From our results, we found that the majority of students at Middlesex, specifically 76%, believe that AI should be allowed with restrictions. We found that most students state that all or most of their professors have told their AI policies to their class. A substantial minority at 43% of students are confused about which ways of using AI are permitted. 55% of students have not used AI to come up with ideas for assignments, find answers for assignments, or to write assignments. And most find AI neither useful for school assignments or outside of school. We also found that slightly less than half of Middlesex students, at 48%, claim that they have been allowed to use AI for assignments and have used AI for assignments. There are various limitations to our study, largely that we only had 99 participants, and so that might not have been most representative of the student body, which contains a few thousand. This study might have been biased towards students who regularly check their email, and many Middlesex students have various obligations outside of school, such as work and family responsibilities, and this can easily deter them from their ability and availability to check their email. Also, certain students might not have the same availability to internet, and that might affect their ability to have checked their email and to have fulfilled um, the the survey. Also, students may have been dishonest. There is a huge stigma around AI. Various professors do have policies strictly um, forbidding it, and so various students might have uh, been discouraged from answering honestly, and this might lead to underestimates in students' usages of AI. Some implications from our study are that there's also this study suggests that AI is not as much of a prevalent and malicious issue as some may have thought. Not as many students use it and abuse it as many might think. Administration professors can be made aware of these results in an effort to change the restrictions and ideologies and to establish a firm and successful policy regarding it. And future research should be done to examine a more representative population. And these are our references. Thank you.
All right, so now we're shifting from our honors psych presentations to our honors capstone presentations. And first up is Liam Shepard.
All right. I, once again, am Liam Shepard, and I did my capstone on the ever-changing landscape of the opioid crisis. To start things off with a little background, I'm going to address my own background also. I've been a pharmacy technician for about 6 years now. I worked all through the pandemic. The opioid crisis is something that I've firsthand witnessed many times in my life, and I've seen the effects of. So this is a topic that's near and dear to me. To start things off, I'll give a brief description of pain. It may seem redundant. Many of us probably know what pain is. It's officially described as any unpleasant sensory or emotional experience. This leads pain to be very, very subjective, meaning no two people will feel pain the same way. And also, therefore, it's very difficult to diagnose. That graphic you see on the screen is about as far as medical science has come in diagnosing pain. Going into that is chronic pain. It's a term I'm sure we've all heard of, but to fully understand it is pain that lasts longer than a typical period of recovery or coincides with an illness. So this would be something like cancer or cancer treatment related pain or arthritis or just generalized back pain. What I don't think people understand about chronic pain is exactly how it feels. It's not, oh, if I twist my back a certain way, I'm hurt. It is, I wake up and my back hurts. I go through my day, my back hurts. I go to bed at night and my back hurts. And unfortunately, about 25% of people in the United States suffer from some sort of chronic pain. So what are opioids exactly? Basically, opioids are just a class of medication, just like any other. They're both illegal drugs like heroin and like certain types of fentanyl. But for this, we'll be sticking to prescription drugs. So these are drugs like Oxycontin, oxycodone, morphine, codeine. All of them are painkillers. A brief history of opioids. The full history of opioids would be going back to ancient Egypt, where they smoked opium medicinally. But for these purposes, in 1995, Purdue Pharma, based out of Connecticut, received federal approval for Oxycontin, a long-acting form of painkiller. They assured the world you couldn't get addicted to it, that it was a miracle drug. You could live your whole life by taking 2 pills a day and never feel pain again. This information was proven to be falsified, unfortunately, and Purdue Pharma is dealing with a litany of lawsuits to this very day. So what am I trying to say in all of this? Well, going into this, I believe that opioids were just simply bad and maybe they should be made illegal. But in doing research, I've learned about just how complex this issue really is. It is not black and white. Opioids have many good and they have many bad, and there are potential solutions to solve it. And I feel an understanding of all of these is really required to understand the epidemic. So to start off with the bad. As we know, opioids have a high risk of overdose. How that works is a side effect of taking opioids is that it depresses your breathing, meaning that it no longer becomes an automatic function and each breath actually is more laborious for you. If you take opioids at a high enough dose, this can actually lead to your brain not receiving oxygen, which is when an overdose would occur. Overdose, as you see from this chart, since the inception of opioids, the numbers of overdose deaths really were climbing. They peaked in 2017, but had been going down, and then in 2019 to 2022, they seem to peak again. This is most likely an effect from the pandemic, but in recent years, the numbers have been trending downward once more. Opioids are also highly addictive, and many patients will self-medicate on them. How this works is basically it releases dopamine in your brain, which creates euphoria, and it's your brain's reward system. Eventually, when taken long enough and a high enough dose, your brain becomes accustomed to this level of dopamine. This is when it would actually start to crave opioids, and you would actually go through withdrawals when you don't take opioids. Approximately 8.6 million Americans have admitted to misusing an opioid prescription as of 2023. Another negative of opioids that you don't hear nearly enough about is the long-term use side effects. Many people assume that when you take an opioid, you're on it for 5 years and maybe the patient dies or maybe you get off them. But some of these patients have been taking opioids for going on 15 years now. And there is a litany of negative effects with this. It weakens your immune system. You're likely to fall. You're likely to break bones. And also, it can create debilitating nausea and chronic constipation. Moving into the good, because it's not all bad. They are truly the most effective medication you could take to combat pain. They are second to none. There are non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, NSAIDs like ibuprofen, but the effectiveness of a morphine shot or oxycodone in a situation is second to none. Actually, in a study conducted of 93 patients being treated for chronic pain, 64% said it was worth taking the opioids for the benefits, even though they were aware of the negatives. This is directly from the mouths of the patients themselves. Another very ethical use of opioids is in cancer treatment and in hospice care. So if someone's going through cancer, it is an unimaginable pain. Your body is quite literally killing itself. And the treatment for cancer is equally painful. You are exposing yourself to radiation. Your bones hurt, your body is weakened. It is quite frankly terrible. An opioid regimen at a low dose would at least allow a patient to achieve some level of a pain-free existence for the most part. And it's very ethical. Another way is in hospice care. These are patients on the last leg of their life. The concern should not be, is this 95-year-old man going to get addicted to Oxycontin? It should be about allowing him to ease into the next transition with a minimal amount of pain. So what has been done and what is being done? So there has been a lot done. Laws such as the Support Act gave financing to states to further opioid research and treatment facilities, as well as prevention in the first place. There's the prescription drug monitoring program that's put in place. That's at a state level. And that allows pharmacies to actually look up your opioid prescriptions. And it would raise what's called pharmaceutical red flags. This is basically when someone brings in a prescription for Oxycontin, the pharmacist would look them up in the system and see if when they had it last, what was the dose, and where they had it. This is important because say somebody got the same prescription 2 days ago at a pharmacy 2 towns over, that would raise a red flag and would necessitate a call to a prescriber. Also, in medical school, opioids are a requirement to be taught now. Obviously, 30 years ago, they wouldn't have been, as they were not nearly as popular as they are now. The effectiveness of these solutions. So, like I said earlier, numbers have been trending down. I mean, the pandemic spiked, but since the end of the pandemic, the numbers have dropped 14.5%. This might be just because of the end of the pandemic, but also the numbers had been trending downward for some time, at least with prescription opiates. Now, the downside of regulations, unfortunately. In a survey I found of 186 doctors, like 44% of them said they would not want to prescribe opioids out of fear of legal repercussions towards themselves, distrust of their patients, or just not wanting to be hassled, according to one doctor, which is extremely unethical. That's a doctor who's considering himself and, I don't want to be bothered, instead of putting the patient first. And that leads patients to fall through the cracks. People who would greatly benefit from these medications, but are no longer allowed to receive them because the doctor didn't want to be bothered. So what can we do to mitigate some of these solutions? A big push has been for this concept of pain management pharmacies. These would be places that solely deal in opioid prescriptions and pain management drugs. This would allow them the ability to really scrutinize every prescription on a case-by-case basis, because as a patient, you see your pharmacist much more than you see your doctor. You have to go there every month to get your prescription. This would allow them routine follow-up. And many pharmacies are often incentivized to push out as many scripts as they can in the day. having a pain management pharmacy to specifically handle opioids would help mitigate some of these prescriptions that might slip through the cracks sometimes. Also, we need to make a treatment more available. Unfortunately, only 11% of people will receive one of the 3 safe medications that allow them to stay in recovery. These are medications called buprenorphine, naltrexone, or methadone. And how they work, they're called opioid inhibitors. They basically shut off the part of your brain that takes in opioids. So you could actually take an opioid while on one of these drugs, and it actually wouldn't do much for you. You'd probably just get very, very nauseous. Unfortunately, again, a lot of people cannot receive these medications because doctors don't want to prescribe them. Also, Narcan, which is a medication used to save someone in the case of an overdose, has been recently made over the counter. This means that a lot of insurance companies will no longer cover Narcan as a prescription because they say you can buy it over the counter. So medication that you were once able to get free with your insurance now costs you upwards of $55. Unfortunately, this is the opposite direction we want to be heading in. So, in conclusion, what do I want you to leave here with? I want you to understand that this is not a black and white issue. There are many, many facets to the opioid crisis. But I also think it's important to recognize your own education in the medical world. It's okay to ask questions. It's okay to second guess your doctor. A lot of people assume that the doctor would be offended or they don't want to bother them, but you should bother them. That's what they're there for. Make that guy work for his paycheck. There you go.
Okay, we welcome back Gatlin Granis, who's also going to talk about drugs.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Gatlin Granis, and today I'm excited to share with you my research into cannabis, including a brief history, the regulations in the state of Connecticut, and how companies may fall short. So cannabis dates back all the way to ancient China, being used for spiritual practices, but also for medicinal benefits, being brewed into things such as tea. Over the following centuries, cannabis got transported along trade routes from ancient China into East Asia and into Europe, continuing to be used for spiritual practices and medicinal benefits. Cannabis and hemp got brought over to the New World, which would become the original colonies that would make up the United States in 1492 by Christopher Columbus. During this time, it was used primarily for the fibers to make into rope and clothing and sails, and it was also derived to make cannabis oil, which was made into products such as this advertisement on the right, Dr. Poppy's Wonder Elixir. This, along with many other products, were commonly found in general stores all across the original colonies and the founding of the United States. This article on the left was one of my favorites that I found in my research, giving accounts of early founding fathers and their opinions towards cannabis, with James Madison even remarking how if it had not been for hemp and cannabis, he doesn't believe he would have had the same insights into creating a new and democratic nation. He's talking about the founding of the United States, which is pretty awesome to see the influence that cannabis had. So cannabis, also commonly referred to as marijuana, is a plant. You can see in these top photos a healthy, alive cannabis plant, and in the bottom photos, a cannabis in its drying and curing stages. This is where cannabis is isolated to just its cannabis flower, or also called the bud, where all the foliage is removed, just isolated down at the flower, which contains a lot of oils that have medicinal benefits and properties. Hemp differs from cannabis and marijuana. While it is the same species of plant, it's cultivated for different things, such as fiber production, and also, by definition, it contains less than 0.3% concentration of THC. So what makes cannabis special is its tetrahydrocannabinol, abbreviated to THC, and cannabidiol, CBD. Both of them have physiological benefits and properties, but THC is the component, an active chemical compound found in cannabis that makes cannabis known for its suppressive effects on cognitive function and motor function, resulting in impaired function. THC also differs from CBD in that people can build up a tolerance to it. So, for instance, medical patients who might be using it chronically or daily would build up a high tolerance compared to somebody who has little to no use of THC. And if they were both given the same dose of THC, the individual with the high tolerance would feel minimal or even no effects, whereas the individual with a low THC tolerance would feel effects. Getting into the side effects and benefits of THC, I found a lot of scientific evidence and research supporting the occasional use of THC and what side effects and benefits are associated with that, but less so for the long-term usage of THC. It's very understudied. Even in the sources that I was referencing for what I'm sharing today, specified and echoed that fact. So more research does need to be conducted into the long-term effects and chronic use of THC. But sticking with the occasional use, notice how in low doses, there's really no adverse side effects from the low doses, but side effects that are more adverse do occur in medium and high level doses with anxiety, paranoia, but also things such as increased heart rate and blood pressure, which get more significant with high doses, such as heightened risk of heart disease, which is definitely a real concern. Again, these higher doses are only really recommended for medical users who need a higher dose because of their tolerance to experience any of the benefits from THC. As for the benefits of occasional THC, in low doses for occasional users, there's a lot of benefits in reducing stress and anxiety, and contradictory to what can be experienced as a side effect in medium and high level doses, low level doses have the benefit of reducing blood pressure, which is really interesting. CBD, similar to THC, CBD has a lot of benefits and side effects, such as reducing anxiety, relieving chronic pain. One finding that I found very interesting is a lot of sources were saying how in syndromes and disorders and diseases that cause seizures, CBD was really effective at reducing or even completely eliminating seizures. So really awesome benefit from CBD. Overall, THC and CBD, which are components of cannabis, are used and prescribed to treat a plethora of different diseases, disorders, symptoms, and syndromes. This is a pretty long list that I'm including here, but it's not isolated to just these things. Most commonly, it is prescribed for anxiety disorders, depression, and sleep disorders, but it is also prescribed for things serious like cancer symptoms and chemotherapy-induced symptoms, such as nausea and vomiting. So relieving a lot of symptoms and negative experiences. So cannabis became illegal in the United States, which is kind of interesting to see as it has a very rich history, even in the founding of the United States, and also has these very proven benefits, at least in the occasional use of THC. Under federal regulations in the United States, cannabis is listed under Schedule 1 of the Controlled Substances Act. This puts cannabis along the ranks of heroin, methamphetamine, LSD, all drugs that are considered to have no currently accepted medical use and considered to have a high potential for abuse. They're enforced by the Drug Enforcement Administration. And more recently, over the past decade, the 2018 Farm Bill Act legalized hemp cultivation and hemp-derived products. So this is where we saw a lot of advertisement online in stores and gas stations for CBD products because they were legalized. As of January 1st, 2025, cannabis is federally illegal under Schedule 1 of the CSA, but it's not enforced by the federal government in states that have cannabis legalized. Medical use cannabis is legalized in an overwhelming majority of the United States, whereas recreational cannabis has been legalized in just about half of the United States. In the states where it is not legalized, federal laws do apply. In the state of Connecticut, the Department of Consumer Protection is responsible for licensing and regulating cannabis establishments to make sure that cannabis establishments are upholding a high quality standard for cannabis. Under these DCP regulations, batch sizing is a factor. So when a cultivation establishment has finished a cultivation grow, they need to isolate their yield into batch sizes, where a sample is then sent off to a laboratory to be tested. And these labs test for THC content to determine the potency of the cannabis, also contaminants such as pesticides and heavy metals, which might still be present after cultivation from pesticides that were used, also fertilizers that trickle down into the soil, and cannabis has kind of an innate ability to soak up such things like heavy metals and distribute it within the plant. Also mold, aspergillus, and yeast, water activity, which can help determine the potential that cannabis can grow mold while it's sitting and waiting, even during testing. It's important to note how cannabis has the highest allowable limits for contaminants, meaning that if a sample sent off to a lab in Connecticut, tested and passed, if that same sample were tested in any other state, it might have not been passed or likely wouldn't have been. Often before cannabis establishments send off a sample from their batch, they'll use a method called remediation, which is a method used to reduce the amount of contaminants, including mold and fungus, but also heavy metals and pesticides that could be residual after cultivation. It is a great method in that it can reduce those harmful factors, but it does have the side effect of reducing THC content and overall diminishing the quality of cannabis. As of December 15th, 2024, the DCP allows a retesting. This is important in that if that sample were sent off and it failed inspection, the cultivation establishment would have an opportunity to retest, meaning that they could remediate possibly a second time, send off another sample from the same batch, and test again. If it passes, it would go on and be sold as normal. So the next step in my research, I wanted to figure out how well cannabis establishments uphold these regulations. And so I conducted 3 interviews with individuals who have experience working with or within the cannabis industry. The first interview that I conducted was with a mold inspector who has experience inspecting many different very large grow facilities all throughout New England. One of their main responsibilities and priorities when they go to these facilities is to inspect the air filtration systems. Commonly, the mold inspector said that they were not upholding DCP regulations or were just malmaintained. This, along with other factors, resulted in adverse consequences of grow rooms being riddled with mold. This was consistent within a lot of very, very large grow facilities. You can see in this, the grow mediums riddled with mold. This would be on the plants as well, where in most cases, thankfully, the plants would be thrown away and disposed of, but sometimes they would be processed and remediated and then sold as normal if passing testing. In the second interview that I conducted, it was with a firefighter who has experience getting called to multiple different cultivation facilities. And in one case, they were called, their department reported to a building that had a fire safety system that got set off. And it turns out that in one of the grow rooms within that cultivation establishment, there was such an infestation of mold that it infringed upon the safety system to the point it was ticking it off constantly. And so that's really, really concerning to hear of the amount of mold that is present in grow rooms. The last interview that I conducted was with an individual, Dr. Markovich, who is co-owner and co-founder of Better Ways in Branford, Connecticut. It is a CBD store. He's also an active lobbyist, helping to ensure that regulations uphold a high quality standard for medical cannabis for medical patients. He had multiple concerns that he presented to me. One of them being how cannabis consumers are really unaware of how cannabis is cultivated in the state of Connecticut and what DCP regulations are, and especially for like allowable limits of contaminants. So for if they were a medical patient, for instance, they would definitely want to be aware of the risks posed by those possible contaminants. Another major concern of Dr. Markovich's that he presented to me was that these very large cultivation establishments often are based in other states as well. This makes them multi-state operators, abbreviated to MSOs. And these MSOs evidently sort of capitalize off of the legalization of cannabis, using lobbyists, because they have a lot of money to expend, to change the legislature and regulations in the state of Connecticut, kind of pushing things in their favor, ultimately beating out local cannabis farmers that may already be producing very high quality cannabis to medical patients, and instead producing high quality or high quantities of cannabis at possibly a lower quality. The consequences of contaminated cannabis are real. I found a lot of case reports of chemotherapy patients who use medical cannabis and ultimately died because of aspergillus. This can be experienced from smoking cannabis, and if there is a spore of aspergillus, which is a fungus, can get into the patient from inhaling into the lungs. It would reside there and then infest the entire body, leading to the patient's death. During an autopsy, the aspergillus would be found, and it would be linked to that medical cannabis that was used. Again, this was a repeated event, which is really concerning. Also, medical cannabis reports of high levels in blood and urine of heavy metal from cannabis were reported. This was also not an isolated event. This was reported multiple times in my research. So in conclusion, Cannabis does have a lot of medical applications and a lot of medicinal benefits, at least for occasional use, and does relieve symptoms and chronic pain, for instance, for patients. Cannabis establishments, unfortunately, do fail to uphold these regulations sometimes. And whether it's that failure to uphold regulations or the regulations themselves, that does lead to real consequences, especially for medical patients. More research does need to be conducted into cannabis for the long-term usage and what side effects might be presented then, but that's my conclusion there. So moving forward, do your due diligence, look into what cannabis you're using, or if you're interested in using cannabis, make sure you know where it's cultivated, what testing regulations are on that cannabis. Feel free to check out CT Canna Warriors. This is one of the main activist groups that Dr. Markovich shared with me. Also a QR code in my full capstone paper if you want to give that a read. So that is my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, shifting gears. Our next presenter is Leslie Dominguez, and she's going to tell us about understanding the artist through various techniques that they use. Leslie.
Hello again. I will be talking about understanding the artist through through techniques. Art is one of the oldest forms of communication. It expresses what words sometimes can't. Artists use materials, tools, techniques to tell stories and to share feelings and emotions. Whether it's a brushstroke or a sculpture, each decision shapes what we see and how we feel. Art helps us connect not just to the artist, but to the human experience as a whole. Painting is one of the most powerful art forms. It captures light, movement, and composition. We start to understand the decisions behind artwork. The paintings often reflect the time and culture they come from, acting almost like time capsules. Color is a visual perception of light being reflected, exciting the nerve cells that line the back of our eyes, and their nerve signals are reprocessed and interpreted as color in our brains. In art, color is a visual language setting the mood for the art piece. We see this concept in the two Fridas. Frida Kahlo painted this oil painting, and she is more well known for her self-portraits because she says that she knows herself best as a subject, so why would she paint anyone else? Her portraits are full of emotion and symbolism. She uses a technique of surrealism to blend surrealism, realism, and symbolism. In the two Fridas, she paints two versions of herself, one in a European white dress and the other in a traditional Mexican dress, to represent her father being German and her mother being Mexican, her two heritages. We have her hearts exposed, representing a sensitivity and emotion. One heart is broken, and the other artery ends in a surgical forceps. The other leads to a small little picture of her husband at the time, Diego Rivera. During this painting, while she was painting, she was also going through a divorce. In this painting, you can see and feel the emotion she was going through, tragic and pain. This painting, she uses the techniques of form, composition, and color. Her work combines personal trauma with cultural pride. We can break down color in value, hue, and saturation. Hue being the colors identified, like red, blue, green, yellow. Value being the relative lightness and darkness of a color, how light the color can be and how dark we can make the color. Saturation is the intensity of the color, how vibrant the color can be. We use a color wheel as a navigation to use colors as an artist. We can identify complementary colors, which are colors that are on the opposite of the color wheel, like red and green, yellow and purple, and blue and orange. They also use analogous colors to choose whether they want their colors to be seamlessly, like red and orange, yellow and green, blue and purple. These choices can completely change how we feel and look at an art piece. We see this with A Starry Night of Vincent van Gogh, a very famous painting. Vincent van Gogh's Starry Night is a great example of how color can be broken down. He painted this landscape while he was in a mental asylum because he was dealing with epilepsy and with the world thinking that he was crazy. It is not just a landscape, it's how he felt in the moment. There is a church standing in the middle of the village to tie into his religious beliefs. He was a big believer in Jesus Christ and felt that he was sent to preach the gospel. There is a cypress tree which is commonly found in Mediterranean cemeteries to add a darkness feel to the landscape. The constellations in the painting were aligned to the constellations from the view of his window at his asylum. His thick paint called impasto adds rawness and intensity to the scene. Impasto is typically used to identify bright colors and to add texture to the painting. He used deep blues and swirling brushstrokes to reflect his inner chaos in the awe of the universe. We use colors in a psychological concept. We often use blue to associate the word of feeling blue. We use it for cold sensations and for cool sensations as well, like water, ice, and all that. Green can be used to depict plant life, but can also be used to show illness and decay. Red can also be used for blood, as we saw in the Frida Kahlo painting. We saw the hearts in red, and there was blood dripping from the scissors. It can also be used to represent aggression, passion, and anger. As artists, we use these associations to influence how we emotionally respond to their work. Picasso was a great artist who showed during these two periods a shift of emotional and eventful events he went through. In the blue period was a time where he wasn't very wealthy, he wasn't settled, he moved a lot. He was going through a tragic event where he witnessed his friend's death. He used cool tones and sad subjects like in The Old Guitarist to depict a sad triumph that he was going through. He drew long limbs and fingers painted bony and fleshless bodies. So in the blue period, he used many shades of blue, but he also used greens, oranges, reds to add life. For the transition of the rose period, he fell in love with this girl, and he started to change his artwork. He started using warm colors, added flowers to add life. He started using characters like acrobats, also adding a Harley Quinn. Between these two periods, you can see the shift in emotion and resulting in painting that appear fragmented and abstracted. He also developed this new art technique of cubism. He wanted to develop a new way of seeing that reflected the modern age, and to show the whole structure of the objects in their painting without using techniques such as perspective. He wanted to show things as they really are in one subject, not to show what they look like, but he brought different views into subjects. Together in the same picture, he wanted to bring together what really was in front of him. Why art matters. Art connects us to history, culture, and emotion. Museums preserve it not just for decoration, but as a record of human thought and feeling. When we look at art, we sometimes see someone else's perspective, and sometimes get a better understanding of our own. That is why studying art is protecting it is so important. In the end, art teaches us how to see, not just visually, but emotionally and culturally. By studying color, form, and technique, we learn how artists express joy, sadness, hope, and identity. Whether it's Van Gogh's skies or Kahlo's hearts, each piece shows us something real about humans. Thank you for listening.
Lisa Lidovich is going to talk to us about the effect of color in another setting, specifically in marketing and consumer behavior more generally. Lisa.
Hello, like Dr. Levy said, my name is Lisa Lidovich, and I'll be talking about the influence of color in marketing, taking into account both the psychological and cultural factors that shape our reactions to color as consumers, and then also how marketers use those responses to guide consumer behavior. So more specifically, I'll be going over the psychological and physiological effects of color, how different colors influence our thoughts and emotions, the cultural associations of color, how different people from different places interpret different colors, and some brand examples, and then finally tie everything together with how marketing strategies and consumer behavior use these implications. So, have you ever driven past McDonald's and suddenly felt hungry? That's not random, and it's not just recognition of the brand. There's actually scientific facts behind that. Red increases your blood pressure and heart rate, and red and yellow together activate responses in the autonomic nervous system, which increases psychological arousal, so the red and yellow of the McDonald's logo scientifically increases your appetite and feelings of urgency, which is why a lot of fast food companies use and rely on the psychological effects of color to trigger these quick subconscious emotional responses in order to increase spontaneous purchase decisions. You also see this used in places like clearance sections where the tags and signs are all red to increase those feelings of urgency. And entertainment services, they use the increased blood pressure and heart rate to influence feelings of excitement. So YouTube, Netflix, things like that. And then on the other hand, cool colors like blue and green have calming effects that reduce blood pressure and heart rate and promote relaxation. And that's why you see blue in places like banks and healthcare, because the feeling of relaxation builds trust with the clients. So while color has these strong psychological effects, it also is heavily shaped by culture. And the meanings in different cultures vary very widely. So one of the most contrasting examples I found of this was the color white. In Western culture, North America and Europe, white is symbolized with purity, innocence, and peacefulness. Whereas in Southeast Asian countries like Japan, China, white is symbolized with mourning, death, and the afterlife. We can see this in weddings where brides in the West often wear white, and then in places like China, they're more likely to wear red because red is a symbol of luck and prosperity. Contrasts like this are so important to consider in marketing because one culture might be turned off by certain colors. And one example of this was when UPS went global and UPS employees wear brown shirts. And so specifically in Germany, the brown shirt brigade of the Nazi era was not taken well. A few brand examples of this include Coca-Cola and Tiffany & Co. So Coca-Cola uses the psychological effects of red to encourage excitement and energy. And Tiffany, the blue color, encourages calm, which also brings feelings of elegance and luxury. A lot of well-known companies use these colors strategically to shape how their brand is received, and these choices are very intentional and central to how a brand positions itself in the market. Also, brand recognition. Brands typically stick with one color for the entirety of their company because color can increase brand recognition by up to 80%, and when a brand is recognized, consumers are more influenced to purchase. But color doesn't just affect how we see a brand, it also affects what we do. From first impressions to purchase decisions, color plays a key role in shaping consumer behavior. It evokes emotion, establishes trust, and creates familiarity, which leads to increased engagement in sales. The pathway is simple. Color shapes emotion, which influences perception and ultimately impacts behavior. In fact, 90% of consumers make purchases based on the visual examination of packages alone, further emphasizing how important color really is. So some implications of this for marketers include understand your target audience, consider their emotions and how certain colors trigger different psychological effects, research before expanding the company and going global, and be consistent with your color branding. For consumers, for us, it's important to take away that we need to understand and recognize that marketing tactics are trying to influence you subconsciously and make more informed purchase decisions based off of that understanding. So overall, color is a powerful and strategic element of marketing, and its psychological influences impact how we feel about a brand or a company, whether that be through hunger, trust, calmness, or energy. Culturally, different things apply to different people based on color, and it's important to research those cultural differences. And ultimately, color shapes brand identity. It influences consumer behavior and plays a major role in the effectiveness of marketing. Thank you.
Excellent. So our next presenter is Wania Fatima. She's going to be telling us about how culture affects sexual health among women in South Asia.
Hello everyone. So the title of my presentation is Breaking the Cycle, the Cultural Norms and Sexual Health of Young Women in South Asia. And I wanted to include this quote: educating a girl is a long-term investment. It will not only give profits only to one generation, but also to the upcoming roots, because education is not just about academics, but directly tied to women's empowerment and her health. So religion and culture are both really prominent factors within South Asian society. So culture-wise, sexual purity is tied to innocence, shame, and obedience, and a lot of moral value comes on a woman's body, and it basically becomes a measure of their worth. And religiously, so Hinduism and Islam are the top two religions within South Asian countries, and they emphasize modesty, virginity, and abstinence. And both of these factors combined, they restrict female mobility, which means like they become more policed rather than boys on pursuing careers and becoming educated. And then the shame and forced conformity, this discourages these women to critically think for themselves and be able to resist the oppression of the societal norms. So there are many communication barriers within the culture, because talking about anything related to sex or menstrual cycles, like a personal anecdote is when I first got my period, it was like seen as something dirty, which obviously is not right because it's something that everyone gets. But cultural silence around sexual health is passed down through generations. And the first thing is parents rarely talk to their children about sex or puberty because they're very afraid of societal judgment. And then in an interview that was conducted by the Times of India with several South Asian women in rural villages in India, they believe that this lack of open communication about anything related to sex, it led them to being confused and guilty about becoming sexually active. And this silence, it does not protect women. And then another thing is, I think the root cause of all this is the lack of education that these girls receive. So nearly 1/3 of girls in South Asia are excluded from education. And in Pakistan, 87% of these girls leave school before the 9th grade. And then with these poor education choices, it directly impacts them of not understanding their sexual health or their limited life choices. And then it limits them to be able to make informed decisions about their bodies in the future. And then since many of these women do not become educated, they have the easiest path in life for them to take is to become married. And then, so 1 in 4 young South Asian women are married before under the age of 18. And these are due to factors such as dowries, which are basically the money that the groom gives the bride's family. And also because society views our married women as, I'm pretty sure you've heard of like old maid. So there's a societal pressure for them to get married. And this pressure is also seen in another interview conducted with these engaged women. Is they felt that because of their limited access to these resources, they were socialized into submissiveness and basically doing anything that their parents tell them to. And then another thing is the role of media. So Bollywood is very influential in like Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh, and they really only have one role for women, and is that they're sexual objects, and they're only there to further the role of the man. So this reinforces a heroic masculinity. And there was a study done in Nepal where many of these boys believe that most girls are soft and weak-hearted, and this leads to a dangerous ideology because in all of South Asia, only 38% of South Asian women have a choice in their own healthcare. So this includes being on birth control or anything related to like IVF or anything related to that. They don't have a choice in that. And another thing is stories about sexual violence are censored. So there was a popular TV show in Pakistan, and it documented a case of a brutal gang rape, and it was only allowed to air for 24 hours before it was canceled. This removes the important discussion that needs to be had about these kinds of things. And then these are the consequences. So because of the poor knowledge on sexual health that these girls receive, their family members, such as mother-in-laws or husbands, become their main, and they are often misinformed source of information. So only 8.7% had sufficient knowledge about sex. So this is relating to the girls in these marriages, and only 11.4% of these women had any knowledge about contraceptives. And then I conducted an interview with a 19-year-old South Asian girl in Pakistan, and she was telling me how she was so scared about how her husband would treat her because she generally does not know anything about marriage. And another scary fact is, so this was done in a research in Times of Vogue, Teen Vogue, sorry, and basically, so this is adolescent women, so women who aren't married yet, 50% of them believe that domestic violence can be justified, and on the flip side, 38% of boys believe that beating their wife is justified as well. So this kind of ideology is directly due to these young men and young women not receiving the proper educated, and this ultimately leads to these young women becoming exploited and hurt in their marriages. And then another types of consequences because of these harmful ideologies is female feticide, which is described as when a woman receives an abortion because the fetus is a female. And this is seen because men outnumber women by 35 million in these South Asian communities. And this just reinforced the fact that women are disposable and they are less than men. And then another thing is sexual violence. So conviction rates for rape are extremely low because in Bangladesh, for example, it's only around 3%. And this is due to a system of victim blaming, which allows the perpetrators to get away with what they did. And then honor killing. So there's no honor in honor killing, so basically it is when a woman's honor is taken, which can be something as small as being in a video with someone that is not like a direct family member. And in 2024, a total of 346 people fell victim to honor crimes in Pakistan. So this also makes the woman live a life in psychological fear, making them feel trapped. And then these are a couple of solutions that I, through my research, kind of had is for society overall is to improve education, especially for the girls living in these rural areas, and improve access to education. And then for organizations such as Marie Stopes PK, which offer contraceptive access and health training, because throughout South Asia there are a bunch of clinics, but they currently spread misinformation, such as saying is if a woman takes a birth control, such as a pill, she'll never allowed to become pregnant again. So these kind of organizations, Mary Stopes PK, they spread the right information. So these are the types of organizations which should be exemplified. And then media, so challenging the harmful media stereotypes, and then for parents to also have open conversations with their kids, and then for the law to advocate for stronger legal protection against sexual violence and honor killings. And then I wanted to include this documentary. It's called To Kill a Tiger, and it's basically about a young girl in a rural Indian village who was brutally gang raped, and there was no consequences for her perpetrators. So this story follows her father trying to get justice for her. And I thought this was very important because it creates an open dialogue about this important issue, because it's still very prevalent even in 2024 and 2025 in this society. And then I want to include this quote because when we educate daughters, we educate generations, because Our mothers are the people who teach us, and I know, like, personally, as a Pakistani woman growing up in America, like, my community tends to, like, ignore what's going on in Pakistan and India, because that's, like, the other side of the world, and it's due to their culture. But this kind of ideology leads to this kind of harmful thinking happening all over again. So the first step is having a discussion like this through this presentation, and hopefully in the future these kind of things get resolved. And thank you. These are my references.
Fabulous. So our final oral presentation for today is by Giovanni Couture. Very much shifting gears into learning about anemia with some models.
Yes, I do have some props here, so you can take a look at these as I am presenting. Oops. All right. So my presentation is on immune-mediated hemolytic anemia. This specifically is a disease for animals. So there is a human variant that is called something else. But as I focus on my presentation here, we will be focusing on a case study. So a quick intro to IMHA, or immune-mediated hemolytic anemia. It is an autoimmune disease where red blood cells are destroyed by the white blood cells of the body, which shows the immune response here. So symptoms of the disease. A 3-year-old male intact domestic short-hair cat presents to the hospital with evaluation of a lethargy and vomiting, diarrhea, inappetence, and weight loss. So as we continue to look for factors on why this may be the case, one of the things that we should be thinking on our minds is, of course, IMHA. Further evaluation by doctors in the hospital reveal that this cat is quiet, lethargic, but still responsive, which shows that there's ways in order to help this cat more. With a high heart rate, a high temperature, and low weight, it shows that this cat had problems in the past as it has been losing weight over time, and the care of this animal is now in question with the quality of life that it is living, right? Upon further examination, we can see the icteric or pale yellow sclera, that is the white of the eye that you can see in front of you there. Pigmenturia, which is the color of the urine, which in this case would be red to show that there is something going on there. And then gingivitis and hypoxia. Right. So diagnostic testing, in order to try to narrow down some of the causes here, it is important to have some testing involved. This includes a blood cell count, in saline agglutination tests, bone marrow evaluation, and Dat-Coombs test. These are the normal parameters that you can see on the screen here. And as we go into detail, we can see more of the problems that are associated with IMHA. So in saline agglutination test, this is where you would drop blood or saline onto each other in order to view them on a slide. You can tell on the picture on the end the agglutination of the sample. If you look at the pictures underneath, you can see how they are supposed to look in normal situations. So with the photo on top, you can see the clumping of the red blood cells together under microscopic evaluation. And beneath that, you can see the gross evaluation that you can tell the clumping is evident as opposed to the normal photos that are below. This is a nice test because it is cheap and it is quick to perform inside of the hospital. So as the cat comes in and you are attempting to narrow down symptoms, this is a pretty good way to see issues that may be more evident in ways that are fast and reliable. Continuing on to CBC and PCB, so complete blood cell count and packed cell volume. The hematocrit is a spun out sample of blood that can show the percentages of blood in the body. So with the hematocrit being 17%, if you go back and look at the normal parameters being 30 to 45% here, you can see that this is not good. This is an obvious case of anemia. as this measures red blood cells. The anemic nature, meaning the lack of red blood cells, shows that this is abnormal. And a noticeable buffy coat, which shows an increased amount of white blood cell activity, which means that there is a immune response that is happening within the body. So this proves that anemia is evident, and under microscopic examination, with the seeing of the nucleated red blood cells, meaning that the red blood cells are young, they still have a nucleus, unlike these ones here that are biconcave, you can see that that means that the bone marrow is producing red blood cells and releasing them immature into the body, which can show that it is attempting to make up for the loss of the red blood cells. All right, Dacombe's test is another test that you can send off to a lab to have done. This is more of a diagnostic test that is used in order to cement the diagnosis here. It shows that the antibodies are clumping to the red blood cells and thus can show that an immune response is happening. However, this is more expensive and would be more diagnostic further down the line in order to prove the result. And bone marrow evaluation. So this is an additional test. On the picture here, you can see the bone marrow inside of the body has quite a lot of red blood cells. That's called erythroid hyperplasia. And that means that it is attempting to make up again for the loss of the red blood cells that are happening in the body. And you can see in this image here, the white blood cells, which are the purple, larger circles on the screen there, that inside of it are eaten red blood cells, which are phagocyzed. All right, other diagnostic tests include urinalysis and culture, biochemical profile, and coagulation testing. Some issues that may arise is, as you can see on the screen here, there is a panel with different colors. With the urinalysis, you would be using urine in order to have a stick change colors to see the values to determine the makeup of the urine. Because oftentimes a symptom is a discoloration of the urine, being red because of the hemoglobin, or being oftentimes a darker yellow or brown due to urea or bilirubin. This can mean that the values here that are shown can be skewed because it's reflected by color. So that is an important thing to notice, especially if you are attempting to use this as an example of testing, because it will skew your results. Further testing includes imaging. So radiography and also ultrasound can be used in order to determine some of the more physical aspects of the disease. If you can appreciate on the screen over there, the arrow is pointing to an enlarged spleen, that's splenomegaly. This could be due to the over activity of the spleen, and we will talk about that more as we go along here. Additionally, the enlargement of the liver that can be seen on the screen up there can also be a deciding factor as we continue on. So we're going to move to forming a full understanding. I'm using this slide to show you the more icteric pinna of the cat's ear here, which can show again an increase of the breakdown of red blood cells and showing more of the yellowing there. So underlying causes. There are many underlying causes that can cause immune-mediated hemolytic anemia. So it is important to understand that as you are examining and trying to figure out these causes, that oftentimes there's an underlying reason. And so there are different symptoms that could change how you're thinking of it. Neoplasia, drugs, and tick-borne diseases are very common causes of IMHA. And continuing on further, vaccine reactions. That is an important one to note because oftentimes under examinations we're trying to determine what causes IMHA. Owners will report anecdotal vaccine reactions. This is important to note because under testing it is not often seen that this is a correlation. However, I have spoken to multiple people regarding how they or their animal, how they believe they have contracted IMHA, and vaccine reactions was one that came up multiple times upon my research. Diseases, including feline immunodeficiency virus, can all have an impact in IMHA. And so that is another important factor that you have to make sure you are addressing, because they can have additional reactions that may not be what is considered to be standard for the symptoms of IMHA. And idiopathic. So in dogs or other animals, it is much more common to have an idiopathic response, which means that it is sort of sudden and the underlying cause is unknown, or there may not be one. It is just a reaction of the immune system. And so for the case specifics of our case here, the causes is feline immunodeficiency virus. You can see a SNAP test. That is a test that you can perform in-house in the hospital, and that is one that is positive for feline immunodeficiency virus, and this could cause the impairment of the immune system and the development of IMHA. Moving on, we will work into etiology. So hemolysis. Hemolysis is the breakdown of the red blood cells. There's intravascular and extravascular, which means that intravascular is inside of the blood vessels, the veins and arteries, and extravascular happening inside of the other organs in the body. So we will focus on extravascular hemolysis because that is the most common type. Anti-erythrocyte antibodies will form inside of the body and will work on attacking the red blood cells. This happens, and if you can appreciate the model that we have in front of me, this happens with the antibodies recognizing the red blood cell here and marking it for destruction by the immune system and the white blood cells. So you can see it is being marked here, there we go, by the antibodies in order to be tagged, sort of, so that the immune system can notify it easier, right? And so, as this continues with the tagged red blood cell here, the white blood cell, the macrophage, which is what you see in front of you here, is recognizing the antibodies on top of the red blood cells and consuming the red blood cell in what is called phagocytosis in order to remove it from the body like it were a foreign invader, like you had a different illness or even an allergen that's inside. However, because this is in the bloodstream and it's blood, it is something that is supposed to be there, this can obviously cause many different problems, with the most prevalence being anemia, which is seen here. And this causes the breakdown of the red blood cell, and as the resources are released into the body, this can see a lot of the other symptoms, like the yellowing of the pinna of the ear or the mucous membranes in the mouth, and the discoloration of the urine as well. So we will move on to treatment. We talked about a lot of bad things and a lot of difficult things that can be hard to handle, but there is definitely treatments that are available. In immediate crisis for short-term inpatient care, transfusions are often essential. Transfusions of whole blood, much as a human might have, or of packed blood, can be used in order to directly replace the loss of the red blood cells. Treatment of these symptoms, including the lethargy and other problems that you may find, are important. Pain management can often be essential. These animals, this cat here, is feeling horrible. Any of us would feel horrible as well. In order to clear and be easier to work with the animal, pain management is very essential. And the monitoring of the vitals here are often important to allow for understanding of whether or not there will be progression of this disease. And then long-term outpatient care. So immunosuppressive drugs are often the most common thing to use in order to deal with the actual problem. So these cause the immune system to relax and to provide an ability to stop attacking the red blood cells as aggressively. This can cause more problems oftentimes, especially if there is an underlying disease that can have effects on the body. So, for instance, in this case, as I mentioned previously, feline immunodeficiency virus can have other difficult factors that are needed to be dealt with, and with the immunosuppressive drugs, that can often cause more problems. So more care may need to be taken depending on the underlying problem. Oops. So in this case, after blood transfusions and supportive care, the cat was able to be stabilized and given immunosuppressive drugs as support. for the IMHA. And for long-term outpatient care, additionally, transfusion therapy may need to happen often in order to make sure that the red blood cells are able to be taken care of properly and there is not the relapse of the anemia. Thromboprophylaxis, which is the prevention of clotting inside of the body, is essential. As this disease progresses, oftentimes there could be a problem with the clotting and the additional issues with the blood in the body. So in order to prevent that is essential. And then supportive supplementation, as I said previously, with pain management and management of other symptoms. This is very important with IMHA. And so preventing progression. Progression is something that is very common with IMHA. Oftentimes, especially if it is not caught early, there can be a problem of not noticing it. And when the symptoms get more severe, they come in and it is in a worse state. So monitoring for signs of different diseases like disseminated intravascular coagulation, which again is that clotting inside of the body, with thrombocytopenia, which is the issue of the immune system attacking the thrombocytes, which are the platelets in the body, refractory anemia, and pulmonary thromboembolism, which is clotting that has moved into the lungs, which can cause a lot of issues with the respiratory tract. So let's talk about a common symptom or a common progression, which is thrombocytopenia. Progression of IMHA can cause not only the attacking of the red blood cells, but also the platelets within the body. This can cause a lot of symptoms or advance the progression of symptoms that are very similar to what IMHA has, including the icteric mucous membranes, which is the yellowing, and issues with the color of the urine, showing that there's continued destruction or breakdown of the red blood cells or the platelets. Issues with clotting, which you can appreciate here. The clotting oftentimes in the body has issues, and so as the animal continues to have its normal life, you can see and appreciate the bruising underneath the skin there that you can tell. And so ultimately it comes down to supportive care. Because this is such a vast disease that can have many different causes, mortality can range from 20 to 60%. Additional factors, including time that it is found, is also important, but the long-term prognosis is good. If the patient can make it past the initial crisis that it is going through, it can be oftentimes able to go into remission. However, it is important to know that in order to continue the care, you need to have a lot of time involved. And so if that is not possible, relapse and recurrence can happen. And so if this were to happen, this causes a lot of other problems and a lot of other struggles that can happen. And this is much harder in order to treat. And recovery is slow and intensive. As I said before, there is a big time requirement for both the patient and the owner. And so because of how intensive it is, this is something that is absolutely essential that you are supporting. With that, we will talk about client education. Client education is essential. So if we were in an environment where we are in a clinic as a veterinarian or a technician and you are working with your clients, you need to make sure you are discussing these possible complications like thrombosis or refractory anemia, as I mentioned before. Time requirements that are available for not only you as the owner, but for the patient as well. Medications can often be expensive and they can vary on effectiveness. And there are issues including immunosuppression that need to be talked to with the owner about. Relapses and recurrence, which can happen oftentimes if care is not managed correctly, or even if it is managed correctly, it is something to make sure we are speaking about. And monitoring as well. Frequent checkups may be necessary. That again goes in with the time requirements. And resources that are available. Oftentimes, people may struggle in order to think about some of the more technical aspects of the disease here. And doctors and other people are very good at talking like this. And some of the terms that used can be quite difficult. especially when you are in a tougher situation dealing with this crisis here. Oftentimes, when you are in an environment where you are talking to a client, they're not thinking about what thrombocytopenia is. That can be a big challenge. And so providing additional resources and talking and sitting down with the clients is a good way to give them the care that is necessary. In this case here, because of this disease and the time that I've had to prepare, I have handouts that you can feel free to pass around to some of our friends here. Take it. And so this is an example of client education that you can use along with the models here that I had made in order to show more of the impact that it can have and to give it in a way that is a lot more digestible and relaxing to the client in their difficult time. With that, I thank you for my presentation here. Yes, what questions do we have? I have a lot that I went over. There's a lot of medical jargon. As you look at your handouts, there are definitions that you can use. Yes? So actually, that's very interesting because I'm in the veterinary technician program. Actually, my instructor is right over there. Hi. It has been a really great experience for me, and looking at a lot of the more technical aspects of like the physiology and how the diseases work are very interesting. And so when seeing this in my anatomy class, we had a presentation where we could choose different options, and I chose this one. And seeing it has caused me to go deeper more than I would need to for the assignment, and it's very interesting to me. Other questions? Yes? So I have not seen any live examples of this myself. I'm in school right now, and school is quite enough of making sure that I can stay on top of that. However, using resources that are available to me, I did have multiple real case studies that I were given by resources like my instructor here in order to see more real life examples. Any other questions?
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you to our student presenters. You did a beautiful job, and you taught us about really important and interesting topics. I'm very proud of all of you. You did a really nice job after a year of a lot of work and blood, sweat, and maybe some tears. Really, really nice job, everyone. Thank you for being such a great audience. When some of the students who will remain nameless expressed some trepidation about presenting, I assured them that they would be among an extremely supportive audience, and you have proven me right, so thank you very much for that. The final part of our event today is a poster presentation by Becky Velahy, which she's right there. Her poster's absolutely beautiful, so please check out her poster, learn from what she has to share. Please help yourself to the remaining food. I want to thank Dean Baker for joining us today. Shout out to Dean Baker, thank you. And I think that's all I got. Thank you so much, everyone.